Let me tell you something about the Galactic Council. They have been around for 600,000 years, 600,000 years, 600,000 years. They have watched stars collapse. They have catalogued the extinction of 47 civilizations. They have sipped their luminescent beverages in marble halls while entire species quietly vanished from the universe. And they thought they had seen everything. They had not seen humans. My name is Vorrath-Seel, Senior Diplomatic Adjudicator for the Krelian Collective, and I was present on the day the Council made the single most embarrassing miscalculation in the recorded history of the known galaxy. I was there. I watched it happen, and I will carry the memory of it for the rest of my very long life, mostly because my colleagues will never ever let me forget it. It began, as most catastrophic mistakes do, with absolute confidence. The human species had been observed for exactly 312 of their solar years before they were formally invited to present before the Galactic Council. 3 centuries of watching, of recording, of analyzing. Grand Overseer Thalvex-Nur himself had reviewed the reports personally, and he had declared in front of 417 assembled representatives that the humans were, and I quote directly from the official record, a moderately clever but emotionally unstable species of limited long-term potential. Moderately clever. That was the phrase he used. I remember the Elorian delegate nodding very seriously at that assessment. I remember thinking it sounded reasonable. I remember feeling comfortable with that conclusion. I was, to put it plainly, a fool. The humans arrived at Council Station Meridian 9 aboard a vessel that made 3 of our engineers physically wince. It was not because the ship was impressive. It was because it was so aggressively, defiantly average. It looked like something assembled in a hurry from parts that had argued with each other. There were welds visible from the docking bay. Visible welds. The Krelian Collective had not used visible welds on spacecraft in 40,000 years. The Suvari ambassador leaned toward me in the observation gallery and whispered, "Is that rust?" It was not rust. But I understood why she asked. 3 humans stepped off the vessel. Their names were Mara Voss, commander of the Terran diplomatic mission. Then there was Corporal Dex Brolin, her security escort, who was so large that 2 Elorian delegates instinctively stepped backward when he walked through the door. And finally there was Dr. Petra Okafor, chief science advisor, who was carrying a cup of a hot caffeinated beverage and did not appear to be paying very much attention to anything. Grand Overseer Thalvex-Nur observed them from his elevated seat with the measured patience of someone who has already decided how a meeting will end. "Welcome," he said, his translation module humming smoothly. "Representatives of Earth, the Council has reviewed your application for membership within the Galactic Alliance. We have some questions." Mara Voss looked up at the chamber. She looked at the 417 representatives arranged in the sweeping semicircular gallery above her. She looked at the towering columns of Volthurian crystal. She looked at the ceremonial banners of every member civilization stretching across 60 meters of wall. Then she straightened her jacket and said, "Yeah, sure. Ask away." Thalvex-Nur's secondary eyelids fluttered. It was the Krelian equivalent of blinking in mild surprise. Around the chamber, there was a ripple of soft noise, the combined sound of 417 aliens reacting to the tone of 2 words. "We will begin," the Overseer said, with great dignity, "with your species' history of armed conflict." And this is where I should have noticed something. This is where, looking back, all the signs were already there, because Mara Voss did not tense, she did not hesitate, she did not look uncomfortable at all. She tilted her head slightly, the way a professional tilts their head when someone has just asked them about their area of greatest expertise, and she said, "Which part would you like to start with?" There was a pause. "The most recent," Thalvex-Nur said, and there was just the smallest thread of something uncertain in his voice. Mara nodded. She glanced briefly at Dr. Okafor, who was now making notes on a small device while still holding her beverage. Then she looked back up at the Overseer, and she began to speak. She spoke for 47 minutes without stopping. She spoke about their conflicts with the calm, organized fluency of someone recounting inventory. She described strategies. She described adaptations. She described how humans had over centuries developed the ability to process catastrophic loss and return to the field. How they had studied failure with the same rigor that other civilizations reserve for success. How they had again and again faced complete strategic collapse and rebuilt, not just to where they had been, but further. By the 30-minute mark, the Suvari ambassador was no longer leaning back in her seat. By the 40th minute I noticed that 3 of the Yalorian delegates had stopped taking social breaks entirely, and were very, very still. At 47 minutes, Voss stopped speaking. She took a breath. She waited. The Grand Overseer was quiet for a long moment. "And your current military capability," he said, carefully now, in the way someone speaks when they are beginning to reconsider a conversation they started with great confidence, "is consistent with this history." Corporal Dex Brolin, who had not said a single word this entire time, and who had simply been standing with his hands clasped behind his back like a monument that had learned to breathe, turned his head slightly toward the Overseer. He did not speak, he simply waited, and somehow that was worse. Thalvex-Nur looked at Voss again. "We will require," he said, "a short recess." Voss nodded politely. Dr. Okafor finally looked up from her notes, glanced around the chamber, and said to no one in particular, "Is there anywhere to refill this?" No one answered her. No one in that entire chamber could quite find the words. The recess lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. I know this because I counted. Every single one of us in that observation gallery counted. Because none of us were willing to leave, not even to eat. The Suvari ambassador had quietly ordered a nutrient pack delivered to her seat. The Yalorian head delegate was communicating rapidly on a private channel with someone. In from the speed of his fingers that someone was receiving very unsettling information. I sat very still and thought about the phrase "moderately clever." I thought about it for a long time. When the council reconvened, something had shifted. It was not visible exactly. The chamber looked the same. The banners still hung in their precise positions. The crystal columns still caught the light in that particular way that made visiting delegates feel appropriately humbled. Grand Overseer Thalvex-Nur still sat in his elevated chair with 600,000 years of institutional authority arranged around him like a very expensive coat. But the temperature of the room had changed. You could feel it. 417 beings who had walked into this chamber that morning carrying comfortable assumptions were now sitting with something else entirely. Something that felt, if I am being precise about it, uncomfortably like respect. Thalvex-Nur folded his primary hands together and looked down at the 3 humans who had not moved from the center of the floor. Voss stood with her hands at her sides. Dex Brolin stood like a mountain that had chosen a career in security. Dr. Petra Okafor had, at some point during the recess, acquired a second cup of her beverage, and was showing absolutely no interest in pretending otherwise. "We have," the Overseer began, "reviewed the supplemental data your delegation transmitted to us during the interval." Mera nodded. "Good. The projections regarding Terran military expansion over the next 40 years. Yes. And the economic modeling. Yes. And the section your science advisor labeled," he paused, as though double-checking the words, "the part where things get interesting." Dr. Okafor looked up. "That is a direct quote from the file header," she confirmed pleasantly. "I stand by it." Thalvex-Nur's secondary eyelids moved again. Faster this time. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly diplomatic, then returned his attention to Voss. "We have a concern," he said. "Just one?" Mina replied. There was an audible sound from the gallery. Something between a murmur and the collective sharp intake of breath from 417 beings simultaneously deciding whether that sentence was bold or catastrophic. I personally could not decide. I still cannot decide. I have been thinking about it since that morning. Thalvex-Nur, to his credit, absorbed the response with grace. He was 600,000 years of institution wearing a single expression. He did not react visibly, but I know the Krellian physiology, and I saw his color shift just slightly toward gray, which is what happens when a Krellian encounters something that requires more processing than expected. "Our primary concern," he said, with enormous, carefully maintained calm, "is this. Your species has been space-capable for less than 200 years. You arrived here in a vessel that frankly alarmed 3 of our engineering staff. Your delegation consists of 3 individuals, one of whom has spent the majority of this meeting consuming a hot beverage, and yet the data you have provided suggests that within 4 decades, the Terran military infrastructure will be the 3rd largest force concentration in this quadrant." He let that sit in the air. Then he said, "How?" Not a question. Just the word dropped like a stone into still water. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that I think none of us expected. she smiled. Not a diplomatic smile, not the careful practiced expression of a negotiator managing a room. A real one. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who has just been asked the question they most wanted to answer. We lost, she said simply. The chamber was absolutely silent. A lot, she continued. We lost constantly. Wars, diseases, economic collapses, resource shortages, our own catastrophic decision-making on a civilizational scale. We spent centuries doing things wrong in every possible direction. You want to know how we got here so fast? We kept very good notes on every single mistake. We failed, and we wrote it down, and then we failed again differently, and we wrote that down too. And then we failed again, and eventually we ran out of new ways to fail. And what was left was the stuff that actually worked. She paused. We are not fast because we are talented, she said. We are fast because we have already paid for every lesson you are still charging other species tuition to learn. The silence in that chamber was different now. It had texture. It had weight. I watched Thalvex-Nur, and I watched him in a way I had not watched him in 40 years of attending these proceedings, because I genuinely did not know what he was going to do. He looked at Voss. He looked at Brolin, who remained exactly as still as he had been for the last 4 hours. He looked at Dr. Petra Okafor, who was calmly reviewing something on her device, apparently completely at peace with the fact that she was sitting at the center of the most significant diplomatic moment in recent galactic history. Then he looked back at Mara. The Council, he said, slowly, would like to propose a formal partnership arrangement, rather than the standard probationary membership typically extended to developing civilizations. Mara's expression did not change. We would want full voting rights within 6 years. 10, 7. Another pause. Longer this time. 8, said Thalvex-Nur, in the tone of someone who is aware they are not winning this conversation and has decided to exit gracefully. Mara extended her hand. The Krellian handshake is not a custom. We do not have it. But Thalvex-Nur had clearly done his research, because he reached down from his elevated platform, and he shook her hand, carefully, with the focused attention of someone performing a gesture they have practiced but not yet mastered. The gallery erupted. Not in applause. In noise. The compressed overlapping sound of 417 beings recalibrating. I turned to the Suvari ambassador beside me. She was staring at the floor of the chamber with an expression I recognized, because I was wearing the same one. Moderately clever, she said quietly. Yes, I said. Thalvex-Nur said that. He did. She turned and looked at me directly. He is never going to live that down. I looked at the 3 humans below, where Voss was already reviewing the next document, where Brolin had finally for the first time in 4 hours, allowed himself a single slow blink, and where Dr. Petra Okafor was holding up her empty cup toward a nearby council aide with the patient, unbothered confidence of someone who had absolutely no doubt that it would be refilled. No, I said. None of us are.